Parent from Carleton University, who's going to talk a bit about how some of the classical sociological thinkers have addressed the issue of religion in society. So he's going to talk a bit about some names that you should know by now, Weber, Marx, Durkheim, and give you a bit of an overview about their own thoughts on the topic. And then Professor Perrin will pass the baton to me, and I'm going to talk a bit about the issue of religious extremism, which is certainly a hot topic. And then as well, I'm going to talk a bit about some contemporary theories about religiosity throughout the world. But before we begin, I want to just make an important caveat for today's lecture. The issue of religion, of course, is quite charged. And people have a variety of different opinions about religion, about the validity of God, etc. And I want to be clear that the goal today of this lecture is really not to convince you one way or another about whether God exists or does not. That's really a question that falls outside of the jurisdiction of sociology. In fact, most sociologists, typically in their work, will sidestep this question about the truth of God. It's a question that we see that lies beyond the kinds of empirical methods that we use in our research. Nevertheless, sociologists can still say a lot about religion. Taking a sociological perspective, we can talk about the social origins of religion, meaning why are people religious? Who is religious? How does religiosity vary across time, across space, across culture? And we can also talk about the cause and effect of religion in society. So, under what conditions does religion act as a source of stability? Under what conditions does religion promote inequality, as an example? Those are some of the questions that sociologists attempt to address in the sociology of religion, and they're things that I'll be talking about a bit later today. But without further ado, then, let me bring Professor Perrin up, and he'll take it from there.
Thank you, Professor Green. I want to say,
my God, he sounds like a game.
Thank you, Professor Green, Professor Green, giving me an opportunity to speak to all of you this afternoon, and giving me an opportunity to introduce the topic of the sociology of religion, which I agree, I think is a fascinating topic, something that says a lot, and is really important to society in general, community society specifically, but also a topic that's quite central to the discipline of sociology. I want to begin the discussion this afternoon about religion by saying that religion, in a sense, historically, is an answer to how do we know what we know. The knowledge that we have, the knowledge that we hold, what we think is true and false, what we think is right and wrong. Historically, and of course all the way to today, for many people, many places around the world, religion is what offered answers to most of life's questions. It imbued every aspect of human social life with meaning. Everything from birth to death, passing through different rites and passages. For example, baptism, marriages, funerals. Religious beliefs were so common, in fact, that most society, until very recently, did not have a word for religion. It was such a part of the everyday life that there was really little need to distinguish it. Before I talk a little bit more about the sociology of religion specifically, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking, just teasing out a little bit, what is religion? And I'd like to start by asking all of you to help me kind of flesh that out. When I say religion is, what comes to mind? And there's two ways in which you can make a contribution right now. Raise your hand, and hopefully I'll take a handful of thoughts. People want to offer their thoughts. But this is a very big room. I don't know if people sort of in the upper balcony are able to sort of raise their hands and participate from there. So another way for you to offer your thoughts or share your thoughts is through Twitter, tweeting with the hashtag #UofTSoRel. And then I'll take a look at the Twitter feed in a few minutes and then pull out some of the suggestions that are there. But outside of Twitter, so if I say religion is, what comes to mind? Yes? Guidance? Thank you. Guidance. So religion is guidance. What else comes to mind? Yes. A common set of beliefs. Thank you. That's very nice. Yes. Control. So religion is control. We already have a little bit of sort of a complexity that's building a little bit here. That's nice. What else do we have? What are other things that come to mind? Speech. Yeah, face. Absolutely. Culture. Religion is culture. Thank you. What else? What are other things that comes up if I say religion is? A way to teach morality. So questions of morality. A few others? Controversial. So religion is controversial. Institution. Religion is an institution. Religion is opium for the people. We'll get to that a little bit later. Yes? Answers, D? Yeah, offer some answers that science does not have. So lies outside of the purview of science. So those are all different kinds of suggestions that people have, or different ideas having to do with religion. What we have in there are different types of elements which fit in sort of different categories. There is no sort of consensus about what the definition of religion is, whether or not we're talking about sort of definitions that all of us are coming up with now, or academics over the course of the last centuries. Other elements that some of your colleagues have talked about: religion is a philosophy, religion is a cult, religion is fading, religion puts your hopes and dreams in superior being that you admire, religion is spiritual. All of these we can categorize in sort of a typology and say that there's substantive elements to those definitions, there's functional elements to those definitions. In fact, Bibby, the author of your chapter and your text for this week, talks about religion as a blurry concept, as something that there isn't sort of unanimous consensus about. A substantive definition, or an aspect of a substantive definition of religion, focuses on what religion is. To be religious is to believe in something. It entails actions, it involves emotions. It's a social phenomenon. And I set up the question with an is question, although some of you didn't go there. Some of you talked about what religion does, which is a different aspect of the definition. And here, we're talking about religion providing meaning and purpose for life, promoting social cohesion or sense of belonging, or like the gentleman said, social control. And we'll talk a little bit later about why that is. Now, there are individuals, and more recently, sort of more definitions that try to combine both the substantive and functional aspects of the definition of religion, and one of those examples is sociologist Emil Durkheim. He said that religion is a system of beliefs, symbols, rituals, based on the sacred or supernatural realm that guides human behavior, gives meaning to life, and unites the believer into a community. So you have, within that definition, really a sense of both the functional and the substantive. I'm going to turn to Durkheim's work in a little bit. Now, there is very few individuals in the history of the world who've had as much of an impact on the thoughts and feelings than the figure of Abraham, the figure of Moses, the figure of Confucius, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad, among others. They've had a tremendous impact on the thoughts and feelings of individuals across time. And of course, it's a big reason, it's a big part of why religion is playing a really important role. It crystallized some of the earlier sets of beliefs into what we now know as some of the world's largest religion. So this is a set of data also accumulated from Reginald Bibby, who's the author of your chapter, although this particular figure is not in your text right now, that lays out what are some of the most populous religions in the world. And even though we do have, and right there at the bottom in red, sort of secular, non-religious, agnostic atheists, 1.1 billion, which is a figure that's much higher than would have been 100, 200, 300 years ago, we still have an overwhelming amount of the world's population who identify themselves as being member of one particular sort of religious groups. It's not difficult to find examples of religions in current events. In fact, there's lots of different examples that we can come up with. Here are just a couple that I pulled out from just this past week. There was a kidnapping of a French family that took place in Cameroon just about a week ago. 7 members of a French family, that happened in Cameroon. the statement from a group taking responsibility for the kidnapping in Saru said that this was in reaction, in revenge for the transgressions and atrocities done to the religion of Allah by the European countries in many places such as Afghanistan and Mali. I'm going to come back to sort of this aspect of religion in a little bit. Another element of religion in the news, closer to home, as it turns out, just within this past week, you have the Prime Minister of Canada who established the Office of Religious Freedom to promote freedom of religion around the world. What we have here in the picture is Dr. Andrew Bennett and a Muslim cleric, Laifan Malik. And this university or this college, Christian college professor, is now going to be, in a sense, Ottawa's sort of official watchdog in order to look at issues of religious persecution around the world. And this is going to become part of the foreign policy agenda. At least that's what the press release said when this office was put into motion. And then finally, even more locally than that, we've got right here in Ontario. So this particular news story is about a Brampton father who's won partial exemption from religious studies for his son, but is still thinking about taking the Catholic school board to court to win a full pass. As other parents across the province are fighting for basic rights outlined in the Education Act, which is having the right, even if the school is a Catholic school, having the right to be exempt from religious studies. So these issues are all very there right now. And of course, religion in Canada plays an important role, not just on the world stage. We have in the national anthem, the line, God keep our land glorious and free. And yet, we do have to acknowledge that religious authority has eroded over the course of the last century. It doesn't govern every aspect of social life as it used to. In the area of medicine, psychiatry, criminal justice, education, among others, there's been an erosion of the influence of religion. It still plays a part, and in some cases an important part, the research can show us that, but it has been an erosion of its authority, and you have what your text talks about as sort of the secularization of these institutions. Other interests and religious interests, and historically in Canada, Christian religious interests animating these various institutions. So this graph from your text, based on research from the census from 2001, again from Reginald Bibby, talks about individual Canadians' religious identification. And there's lots of elements to this graph, but I want to draw your attention specifically to sort of some comparison and some variations between provinces. While the national numbers are that there's 16% of Canadians who don't identify as a member of a particular religious group, that number varies quite a bit between provinces. BC, for example, that number is as high as 36, and while in Ontario it's about the national average at 16, and in Quebec, in Nova Scotia, in Nunavut, that number is much, much smaller. So there's lots of variations here about people's religious identification, or whether or not they identify as members of a religious group within sort of spatial parameters. And this other graph, that's also from your text, speaks to a different kind of variation. It speaks to a variation on the basis of age. It talks and it compares adults and teenagers along a whole different lines of how we would look at or try to measure a religion. Now, Professor Green is going to go in more detail a little bit later about different aspects of religiosity, but what you have here on this screen is along beliefs in God, along beliefs of life after death, practicing weekly weekly rituals or weekly prayer, also spirituality and whether or not one as religious involvement is important on all these different measures. There's a statistically significant difference between these two age groups. So what we have is two different kinds, and there's others, two different kinds of variations. Religious beliefs vary in content and intensity. Religious ritual practices or rituals vary in form and frequency. Now, part of that, at least the part that sociologists are most interested in, how these vary based on and due to some elements having to do with society and our place in it. The effect of this around the world is that religious impulse takes thousands of different forms. The mission of the sociologists of religion, or sociologists interested in religion, is to try to account for these variations, trying to do so empirically, trying to look at data and be able to explain Why are these differences, for example, between countries about the religion that's being espoused? Why are there these differences within Canada, between different regions? Why are these differences along notions of age? And then we can look at social class, we can look at gender, we can look at lots of different other measures. So we've gone now to the sociology of religion. The definition of sociology that you've been using all year, the one from sort of New Society, is that sociology is the systematic study of human behavior in context, in social context. And the study of religion is no different. Pulling on something that Professor Green spoke, Bibby, the author again of your text, talked about how religion and science aren't necessarily incompatible. We don't need to see them in incompatible ways. While religion is about faith, which is this sort of element of the non-perceivable, or as the comment really mentioned, religion speaks to things that science can't provide answers to. Science, for the most part, limits itself to the perceivable. It limits itself to what's called the observable parts of religion. So that means what? It means written text, it means patterns of behavior, it means individuals' opinions about religious matters. It means using standard sociological research methods to go and find information on issues that can be actually sort of measured, that can be looked at, that can be mapped, that can be understood in this work. And again, it's my understanding that you'll be looking at more in detail to sociological research methods the last 2 weeks, a little bit later this semester. So sociologists are interested in a whole series of questions. Now, I'm not going to repeat many of those because they were mentioned by Professor Green already, but there's a whole series of questions that sociologists are interested in. And some of these are how many and what kinds of people are involved in religious groups. Some of these is what impact religious involvement has had on individuals and society. And then the important question of, are we becoming more or less religious? What is it? What are the implications of this? What are the implications of the changes in our relationship as individuals, as a group, as a society with religion? And then we can add to that, what happens in a society, a multicultural society like Canada, when multiple faiths come together and encounter one another and then coexist, both in a day-to-day life, so micro-level interactions between people who have to negotiate this, but also at the institutional level, looking at the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, or education. So what you have is, and this is just a sample, is lots of different areas where the sociologists of religions are interested in making a contribution to. Looking at religion and the role of organization. So how is churches, for example, versus cult versus sex, a topic that's covered in your text? How did these change the nature of people's relationship with religion? Or if we're talking about spirituality, for example, or New Age movements, sometimes outside the purview of organizations at all. The role that religion, for example, has in education. Historically, many of the colleges, universities, high schools, elementary schools had a strong, were founded by a sort of religious group and a strong religious flavor to them. And that's changed. Certainly in the Ontario public school system, that's changed quite dramatically. Well, what's the role left for religion in schools? Should students in elementary school and then even more so in high school be taught about religion? And if so, which religions and how should that be presented? Religion and gender, looking at issues of religious leadership, looking at the role that women have within different religions in terms of their access to spaces, in terms of their being able to be full participant members of their religious communities. Religion and politics, of course, is a really important part. And the example of sort of the news clip that I had is there. There's lots of examples of sort of religion and politics that we see around us all the time. Historically, lots of wars have been fought over religion, including the Holy Crusades in the 11th and 14th century. And we can also talk about, and we can't talk about religion historically without talking about the history of religious persecutions. People being persecuted to their beliefs. And I say historically because it's been going on for a long time, and of course, it's still happening right now, something that sociologists are interested in. I will say religion and the law is a really important aspect too, because the law is one of the places where that dictates what religious practices are seen as acceptable, for example, in Canadian society. The law is where, for example, minority groups turn to be able to protect their right of a religion, their right of freedom of expression of religion, and making sure that they're not discriminated against on the basis of their religious faith. And then I say finally, just for purposes here, religion and mass media. Gutenberg, who invented the movable sort of printing press, the first book published in 1456 was the Bible. Within 50 years, there were millions of books across Europe. Most of those were about religion. And that had a tremendous impact on the world, tremendous impact on having the sacred sort of scriptures being in the hand of clergy and scholars to now potentially being in the hands of millions of individuals. So more recently, the use of the internet. Different religious organizations using the internet to be able to reach out to followers. You're able to connect with other people who believe the same thing that you do. You're able to exchange texts, exchange clicks, exchange news stories. You're able to form sort of an online community. So mass media plays an increasingly big part in some of the religious organizations in the pursuit of religious beliefs. And here, specifically, in the University of Toronto Sociology Department, Professor Brian, who teaches the second-year course on Sociology of Religion, has done work on religion and history, looking at religion in ancient Greece, looking at, for example, the rise of Christianity, specifically in the Roman Empire. And Professor Sheeman also does work on religion. He looks at the links between religion and well-being, religion and health, and then even more specifically, religion and mental health, what role and impact it may have. So those are some examples of how sociologists of religion have looked at and approached the different topics. What they have in common is that sociologists of religion analyze how individuals, social institutions, and cultures construe God or the sacred. What they have in common is that many of them look at how these ideas penetrate public cultures and penetrate individual lives, looking at the implications of these interpretations for individuals, for institutions, and for society. And the study of religion isn't new. Religion has been around for a long time, and sociology of religion, or the sociological study of religion, has been around for as long as the discipline of sociology has been there. And so I want to take the next few minutes, and sort of this last part of my guest talk, to highlight some of the ways in which some of the founders of the discipline of sociology have talked about, or have written about, religion. So you have Durkheim, who wrote, for example, how religion's origin is social, who's written and argued that people living in communities, people spending a lot of their time around one another, sort of close confines, develop this general collective conscience, this ways of seeing things, this ways of understanding the world. That the kind of sort of pressure we feel from society through sort of norms of acting in particular ways, that individual communities externalized that, projected that into an outside figure, and that outside figure was God. So essentially, according to Durkheim, God is the group experiencing itself. What that led to is individuals, groups, people, designated objects as sacred or as profane. Now, objects that are sacred, they're the ones that are seen as deserving of profound respect. And profane are objects of the everyday world. It's not the same from religion to religion. In fact, every religion has its own set of sacred symbols. But what Durkheim was arguing is that every religion has this set of symbols that are held to be sacred. Now, some examples. For Christianity, what's held to be sacred? For example, the symbol of the cross. And associated with that, the figure itself of the Pope. And this is very apropos right now, since Pope Benedict XVI is retiring tomorrow. The first time in 600 years that a living Pope is going to retire. So here you have today, when I woke up this morning, wall-to-wall coverage of the Pope. And then tomorrow, for those of you who are up early, 4:30 a.m. is when the CBC's coverage starts of the last day of the Pope in his office. And he's retiring tomorrow afternoon. And then there'll be lots of news coverage in the coming weeks about the election of the next Pope. If we're talking about a sacred, and we're talking about sacred within the religion of Islam, we have here the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred mosque that's built around the Kaaba in Mecca. And I also have an example of the menorah, sacred in Judaism, the symbol of Judaism since ancient times and the emblem of the modern state of Israel. Can I get a couple couple of suggestions of other elements, other sort of sacred symbols, sacred objects that are attached to particular religion. Just to kind of flesh out that it's not just about these three examples, but of course there's far more than that. Yes? Oh, okay. I cross for Scientology, okay. What else do we have? Yes? Little figurines, a sacramony. Thank you. What else do we have? And I'm not an expert in all the different world religions, so I just take you to your word, unless something sort of sounds wrong when you're giving us some examples of sacred items. But what else do we have? Can we get just a couple more examples? Yes? The statue of the Buddha. Yes, thank you. So maybe a couple more. If you have your hands and I can't see you, just wave a little bit. Eventually there'll be some laughter around you and I'll spot you. Yes? So fire, in Judaism, Sikhism, and Shinto. Thank you. One more? Yes? Pentagram and paganism. The medicine wheel for Aboriginal, let's say, people. Okay, so thank you for that. So what we have is religious beliefs, according to Durkheim, is what constitutes as the sacred. What is the sacred? That's what the religious beliefs are. Is what's held to be sacred, what's held to be reverent. It articulates the nature of the sacred and the symbols. And religious rituals, they provide a guideline on how people should act in the presence of these sacred symbols and these sacred objects. Religion creates and reinforces social solidarity for Durkheim. That even if it's felt sometimes on an individual level, it's reinforced and really passes through what's called the social. He says, and he would have talked about social solidarity all the way back at the very beginning of this course, and talking probably in the context of suicide. Social solidarity, it contributes to social stability because it establishes moral standards of how to act. It sets out a right and wrong that dictates what can be done in society that fits the norms and what can't. It also produces a sense of belonging. You're sharing this deep bond with others who share the same beliefs that you do, who have the same vision of religion, of the world that you do. Now, Durkheim and sort of functionalists more broadly are not without their critics. Sort of the main one is that they may overemphasize religion's role in maintaining social cohesion. And that takes place by essentially downplaying a religion's dysfunction. And by that I mean that strongly held belief, any strongly held belief that's very deeply strongly held, can lead to social conflict. And fundamentalism is an example, and I think that's something Professor Green will speak more about, so I'll leave that be for now. And when religion does increase social cohesion, sometimes it reinforces social inequality, which is certainly something that Marx argued for. So let's turn our attention to Marx for a moment. So Marx and sort of the conflict perspective. Religion is also a human creation. And the quote was already given to me in The Religion Is, so thank you for that. Marx's famous quote is indeed, religion is the opium of the people. Another way in which that quote gets translated, it's the opium of the masses. So the opium of the people, why does Marx say that? Marx says that because he says it soothes the disadvantaged by minimizing the importance of this world. You may have a really tough life. You may have a really, really difficult time here, but there's promise of a reward down the road after you pass away in the eternal life. You may have a difficult time for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but there's an eternity of rewards down the road. What religion does is that, according to Marx, it encourages people to accept the existing social inequalities instead of changing their oppressive condition. It does that by putting people under false consciousness, which essentially convincing the whole population that they share a common interest with members of the dominant class. So that's a little bit abstract. What do we mean exactly by this? Well, we mean that historically, some religions teach that the existing social arrangements of a society, the social stratification of a society, the lack, for example, of social mobility in a society, is the desire of God. Rulers justify, legitimate their rule historically by declaring that it's the will of God. Now, if we go back far enough, the pharaohs presented himself as God, The European monarchs said they were ruling because of divine right. It was the will of God. So Marx allows us to sort of talk about religion in a different way. And then stemming from his work, so